Hello, Booktube, and welcome to another weekly reading vlog. Well, I still have not gotten around to reviewing Tarzan of the Apes. I believe I said on last week's weekly reading vlog that I would probably do it this weekend unless we went traveling. And I mentioned my wife had some plans that we might go traveling to visit her aunts. We ended up going traveling. In fact, I've already posted the travel video from that trip. I'll also link to it down in the description down below. We went to visit her aunts down in Bahria. I took my camera with me and just did some filming while I was there. Did not get around to reviewing Tarzan of the Apes. But maybe I'll get around to it this coming week. Um, I also have been working on the Peloponnesian Wars by Donald Kagan. Last week I had 96 up to page 96 read. I'm now up to page 162. I don't really know if I have that much intelligent to say about the pages I've read. I mean, it's interesting. There's a lot of interesting personalities in here. Pericles, Cleon, some interesting insights into Athenian politics during this time, and lots of battles and campaigns. It can almost borders on a little bit tedious, just all these campaigns after another. But so far, I'm still finding it interesting. I had mentioned last week that I wanted to reverse my habit of reading several books at once and just concentrate on finishing this one for the next few weeks or however long it takes me. But I broke that promise, broke that resolution. And the reason is because we were traveling this weekend and spending some time at my wife's aunt's house, which typically means there's not a lot for me to do. Everyone's speaking in Vietnamese, so I always try and bring a good book to get some reading done. Of course, I do have two kids now, which require attention and cut into my reading time. And yet, at the same time, when we're visiting the relatives are often eager to interact with the kids. And I almost took the Peloponnesian War with me, but then decided against it at the last minute for three reasons. One is that I was a little bit worried that just reading about the various military campaigns could get a little tedious if I was trapped in my aunt's house with just one book for a while. Secondly, I don't know. Whenever I travel, I always get paranoid that something could go wrong. The luggage could get stolen or get caught in a rainstorm or something like that. And this book is a book that, if it were to get lost or damaged, I wouldn't be able to replace it in Vietnam. I mean, after I finish reading it, I don't care what happens to it. But this is a book I bought the last time I was in the U.S., and I don't think I could track this down in Vietnam. And have been waiting to get around to this for some time, so I'd be quite disappointed if something happened to it midway. And then third, this book is mostly portable, but it's a little bit on the big side still. Smaller books are available. So looked at some of the smaller books in my bookshelf that I've yet to get around to, and went with the Odyssey. So ordinarily on this channel, when I start a new book, I make a new started video for that. But because this was something I grabbed at the last minute as we were heading out the door, I didn't get a chance, and then we were at my aunt's house for 2 days. So I'm just going to wrap the started video into the weekly reading vlog. So this weekly reading vlog will also function as the start video for the Odyssey. Even though I am now 116 pages into it. managed to get 116 pages right over the weekend, which is good for me. 100 pages in a couple days is good for me. Anyways, I read the Iliad earlier this year, in which I talked all about my relationship with the Iliad, and the Odyssey is really the same thing. So, as with the Iliad, I fell in love with the story of the Trojan War back in middle school, and did not, of course, read Homer directly. I was reading other stories, the Trojan War by Olivia Coolidge, and then some other stuff that was in the school library, whose the names or authors I couldn't tell you, but books that retold the Odyssey for kids. You know, picture books with lots of illustrations about all the monsters in the Odyssey. And I was, I was more interested in the Trojan War, but the Odyssey is also a great story. And of course, there was the connection because Odysseus, the hero of the Odyssey, was from the Trojan War. So around the same time I read the Iliad, I read the Odyssey shortly thereafter, back in, I believe it was 7th grade. So this is a reread for me. I reread this back in 7th grade. Now, the Odyssey was all right, if my memory serves from 7th grade. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it nearly as much as the Iliad. See, the thing is, going into the Iliad, I already knew the story because I had read the Trojan War by Olivia Coolidge and a few other retellings of the Trojan War before I got to the Iliad. But the Iliad just has so much action in it that even if you know the story, there's just so many heroes meeting each other on the battlefield and just so much detail of the battle that you just get utterly immersed in it. The Odyssey, by contrast, the story of Ulysses or Odysseus heading home, that does make for a great story, especially if you read like one of the children's versions of it. And there are a number of really great set pieces to this. You know, the Cyclops, Circe, who turns his men into pigs. I forget the names of them. The whirlpool and the 5-headed dragon that comes out. The journey to the land of the dead. You know, everybody remembers those big set pieces. But there's also a lot of boring stuff in the Odyssey. At least that was my recollection of when I was a kid, when I was in 7th grade. There's a whole lot of setup before we even get to the good stuff. The whole thing is told by way of flashback. So it starts off with Telemachus, Odysseus' son, who's dealing with the suitors. And I always found that kind of like a boring conflict. I mean, the suitors are just not interesting characters. And yeah, sorry, I'm mixing in some of my reminiscing with some of the reading I've done the past couple days. But I'm discovering this the past couple days to be just like I remembered it from 7th grade, even more so. I mean, right now I am in book 8, 116 pages in, and we haven't even gotten to the good stuff. The good stuff doesn't start until Odysseus begins his flashback, and it looks like that is going to start in book 9 at about page 128. And then he will go through the Cyclops and Circe and all that. But that only takes up, the stuff that everybody remembers only takes up a little bit of the book. The rest of it is just him going home and fighting the suitors and his son Telemachus journeying out for word of him. And when Telemachus goes places, he or when anybody goes places, there's always speeches about welcome traveler, come in and taste some of our hospitality, and there's all this, yeah, really boring, boring stuff. Well, boring is overstating it. It is interesting to see the level of detail that has been preserved in this epic. Some 3,000 years later. I mean, it talks about the author, Homer, I guess we'll call it Homer, put in a real level of detail about what the buildings look like, what the food was like, what people were wearing. It's yeah, in that respect, it seems incredibly modern, where you really get these scenes drawn for you very elaborately. Yeah, and by the way, I'm reading a prose translation. I'm reading actually. I picked these two books up at the same time. They're both published by Arcturus Publishing, which is just what happens to be available here in Vietnam. The Iliad was the Samuel Butler translation. Samuel Butler also did a translation of the Odyssey, but for whatever reason, that's not the translation the publishers went with. They went with the prose translation of T.E. Lawrence. Now, I thought that name sounded a little bit familiar, so I Googled it, and sure enough, it's T.E. Lawrence's The Lawrence of Arabia, you know, from the famous movie. Yeah, this is the Odyssey translated by the infamous Lawrence of Arabia, who, at some point in his career, I guess, did a translation of the Odyssey. So yeah, it's a prose translation. It actually reads fairly smoothly. I mean, the action is really slow, but the prose is all right. So yeah, what's happened in this book so far? Well, yeah, as you may know, the Odyssey is famous for starting in, I guess, what literary people call in media res, in the middle of things. Although it's not completely in the middle, it actually starts more towards the end. I guess if you were going to proportion the whole 10 years of Odysseus's journey. It starts right at the 10th year when his journey is almost done. But, yeah. So it's all about Telemachus, who's his son, who's frustrated with the suitors. He confronts the suitors. He has a meeting in Ithaca. He fails to get rid of them. Then he gets advised by the gods to seek out, specifically Athena, to seek out news of his father. He journeys to meet Nestor. Nestor gives him some news, and Nestor advises him to visit Menelaus. Goes to visit Menelaus, and then talks to Menelaus. Then in book 5, we cut back to the gods, and the gods are worried about, well, I guess Athena, again, most specifically, is worried about Odysseus, who's being kept at Calypso's island. So Odysseus still has a few more adventures to get through. He's got to get freed from Calypso's island. But all of the big set pieces of his adventure are already in the past at this point. So Hermes goes and talks to Calypso. Odysseus gets advised on how to make a raft. Then we do have a little adventure here where Poseidon catches Odysseus on the raft just when Odysseus's journey is almost done. So Poseidon shipwrecks him, and he ends up at the lands of the Phaeacian people. And this is where he emerges naked, and the princess sees him. And then he's brought back to the house, and they give a dinner in his honor. And then book 8, which I'm in the middle of, they're doing games in his honor. But yeah, so all of that is just I don't know what it is, build up for when in book 9 Odysseus is finally going to start his flashback, and then he's going to recount all the things that happened, and that's where you get all the big events that stick out in the imagination, the Cyclops and Circe and the five-headed monster and stuff like that. But you still you sure have to wade through a lot of stuff to get through it. Sorry, to get to it. So yeah, my 7th grade memory of reading the Odyssey is that it wasn't nearly as exciting as the Iliad, and I'm finding that certainly on rereading it as well. I think the really imaginative parts are great, but that only makes such a small fraction of the book. Anyways, I'm gonna wrap it up here. Once again, it's filming this right before bedtime, so it's time for me to wrap things up and get to sleep. And I'll hopefully maybe this week be able to film the Tarzan review. We'll see how things go.